All right, guys, we are about to recap UFC 309, starting from the main event all the way down to the prelims, starting with Jon Jones and Stipe Miocic. So we obviously seen that Jon Jones got the spinning back kick TKO, finished it off on the ground against Stipe. Stipe just looked like a real slower version of himself. Nothing really unusual towards anything that we would have expected out of this fight. Now, before I go on and talk about the rest of the fights, let me just be honest and say this, right? This really was no different than the Mike Tyson and the Jake Paul fight. The only difference is that Jon Jones showed no mercy against Stipe Miocic here, whereas with Jake Paul, he sort of showed a lot of mercy towards his hero, Mike Tyson. So that was that. Great wrestling on the part of Jones. Took him down early in the round, early in the first. And then in the second, it was just all the same jabs, front kicks. And eventually he circled Stipe around to where Stipe got caught with that spinning back kick and then finished it off. And that was the end of the fight. So before I continue on and talk about Charles Oliveira and Michael Chandler in the co-main event, I want to talk about Mike Tyson and the correlation that we can relate to about dudes that just don't know when to quit when they are too old to be doing anything. You know that song by Blink-182, What's My Age Again, right? What is this song about? It's about dudes that act out of their age. So in other words, Mike Tyson is very similar to that. There's a lot of OGs out there in the streets that should not be in the streets, that should be transitioning to a new form of life, but just can't leave it alone and continue to put themselves at risk, eventually getting arrested, going to jail, or perhaps nefarious things happening to them. Either way, you got to know and learn when to quit. And that's the entire story of Mike Tyson's career and everything. Now, look, here's a difference though, right? It's a little different. You want to know why? Understand this, right? With Mike Tyson, he actually made money taking this risk. A lot of you street dudes out there that are living that life and using combat sports as a metaphor to that, you're not going to go home with a bag. You're going to go home in a jumpsuit. You're going to go home hurt and physically injured in whatever endeavor that you're trying to get into, especially when you're dealing with street stuff or dealing with a dangerous type of work that you should not be doing at a certain age. But I think overall, that is the lesson that we learned. This whole entire weekend, the main events of the two major fights that we had going were predicted right down to the T. We knew all of these fights were going to happen the way that they did. We knew that if Jake Paul was not going to knock out Mike Tyson, he was going to basically carry the entire fight. And we knew that eventually Jon Jones was going to finish Stipe at some capacity. Didn't have to be the first round, didn't have to be the second round, but it did happen in the third round. Spinning back kick, then got to do the little dance that Donald Trump does right in front of him, points at him, even shouts him out, gives him the belt, only for Jon Jones to give the belt back to, Donald Trump to give the belt back to Jon Jones. Either way, everything that we expected for this weekend happened, and it happened right down to the T. Now, with Charles Oliveira and Michael Chandler, we obviously know that these guys fought the second time around. It was a win for Charles Oliveira. This time, it was a decision win for Charles Oliveira. Didn't get to finish him. But Michael Chandler made a good account of himself. He was swinging for the fences, not exactly the most technically sound style that you want to approach, especially with somebody like Charles Oliveira, who's highly technical, also is very good at hitting you with straight shots, and as a result, got the win. But great moments for Michael Chandler, got to slam him down a few times on the ground, twice, picked him up, slammed him down. But this does not disqualify Michael Chandler from getting a Conor McGregor fight. In fact, this makes that fight even more competitive because, quite frankly, Conor McGregor is not exactly top tier 155 these days. But for sure, Michael Chandler would probably be a lot more seasoned and a lot less rusty than Conor McGregor right now. Either way, still an interesting fight. Charles Oliveira is still on top. He can fight other 155ers, still continue to be a gatekeeper, or continue to look for a title shot somewhere down the line and continue to rack up wins. Moving on, Bo Nickal versus Paul Craig. Now, this fight right here was very close. A lot of people were not impressed by Bo Nickal's performance here. There were no takedowns attempted, and I think a part of that is because he did not want Paul Craig to have an advantage on the ground, especially off his back. So he fought like the way that he did. He had a few body punches that he had connected, had the higher percentage actually in this fight, which is the reason why many people, including the judges, thought that he won this fight. But many people thought Paul Craig won the fight too, and I think that's just predicated on the volume strikes that he had. A lot of body punches was keeping Bo Nickal at bay, but nonetheless, Bo Nickal said that, hey, you know what? I'm constantly looking to improve my fight. He didn't see this fight as a failure, even though many of you may think that. But that's Bo Nickal in a nutshell. He just feels this is just another way of improving. He's not trying to fight at a pace that people want him to fight or fight at a level that people wish that he should be at right now. But that's Bo Nickal for you right now. A win is a win. You can't judge a fighter just based on getting a decision. Why? Look at Khamzat against Gilbert Burns. He didn't look too good. He sort of scaped by. Even with Usman, he scaped by. But guess what? In Khamzat's last fight, he showed you who he was, because in the next fight of Bo Nickal, maybe he's going to show you who he really is, and maybe with a different outcome. Sometimes you can't always get all the finishes, and sometimes you have to fight your fight and not fight anybody else's fight to get you off your game. In other words, you can't overextend because people want you to. You can't overfight because people think that it's boring or they don't like the style that you're implementing. But guess what? If you're winning, you're winning. And if it works, do what works for you. And that's really the name of the game by the end of the day. Big ups to Bo Nickal. Vivian Araujo versus Silva. 69% striking percentage for Araujo and 43% for Silva. One takedown, and Vivian had 3 out of 3 takedowns, which I think ultimately won her the fight. Great scrambles on the ground, great submission attempts, great striking. Overall, great mixed martial arts between these two ladies, but Vivian Araujo won in the end. Mauricio Ruffy versus James Lipiton. Now, there were no takedowns in this fight. 6 attempts by James, all got stuffed. The striking was on Mauricio's side, not so much on James's side, the percentage-wise, but the volume was on James's side and just wasn't enough. Shout out to Mauricio Ruffy. Very good style, by the way. Reminds me of a Conor McGregor style of Taekwondo karate movement that he had going on. Had his hands down, switch stances. Very Conor McGregor-like in the way that he approached this fight. I'm talking like early Conor McGregor 2014 worth. But yeah, shout out to Mauricio Ruffy. He got the win on that one. Jonathan Martinez versus Marcus McGee. Marcus McGee got the win off of this one. No takedowns in this fight, just a few clinches involved. But the volume, I think, of Marcus McGee is ultimately what won him this fight, and that is all that she wrote. Now, Jim Miller gets an early submission against Damon Jackson. Damon Jackson goes, shoots in. Jim Miller gets the guillotine choke, and that was all she wrote by the end of the day. David Onama taking on Roberto Mero. David Onama gets a decision win on that one, gets a takedown in the fight. 59% total strikes, gets a higher percentage of strikes over Roberto Romero. 79 out of 165, 145 out of 242 out of David. Really high volume in this fight, and I think ultimately that's what won him to fight. Now, how about Myson Tybura? This one I got wrong viciously, okay? Because I thought that Dienes is a undefeated heavyweight. You know what? Here's the thing. You can never trust these undefeated heavyweights. Not even Mick Parkin. He's undefeated right now, but you get him in there with the right guys, eventually he's going to face some sort of adversity somewhere down the road, and that's just the way it is, and that's just how it goes. Big ups to Myson Tybura in his TKO finish. John Jatona, or Dennis, the Brazilian fighter, he took him down the first round, only for Marcin to reverse, get the scramble, and get the better of those exchanges by the end of it all. And that was the end of the preliminary cards. Now let's get back to the early prelims. How about Mickey Gall? Okay, Ramiz gets a knockout out of nowhere. That right there was, I mean, look, Mickey did great, man. He did great for an early period of time, but eventually it just fell into where it was, and that was all she wrote. Mickey got caught. That's just really the best way to put it. Where does Mickey go from here? Who knows? Will he get cut by the UFC? Maybe. Now, Oban Elliott versus Basil Hafez. Oban Elliott gets a decision win on this one. No takedowns in this fight. Just the striking percentage was on Oban's side, and that's ultimately what won him this fight. But he got a TKO finish by the end of it, right? You thought that he was just going to coast to a decision, but out of nowhere, Oban Elliott gets a finish, and big ups to him. It's a great way to get a win. I mean, obviously, you could have just coasted and got a finish, but by the end of it, you got to finish Basil, and that was all she wrote. So, one more fight, Veronica Hardy versus Eduardo Mora. Eduardo Mora won this one. Very close fight. Just the percentage, by the way, was higher on the side of Veronica Hardy, but the takedowns of Eduardo Mora is what won her this fight. By the end of the day, wrestling wins fights. If there is one thing I could tell you about the first fight of the night and the second fight of the night is this: wrestling wins fights. Jon Jones won by wrestling, and by the beginning of the fight, Eduardo Mora won by wrestling. And how ironic, her and Jon Jones met during fight week, and Jon was like, hey, you're fighting on the card? He's like, yeah, I'm the first one to fight. And Jon Jones gave her the props, and that was that. By the end of it all, wrestling wins fights. It won the first fight, and it won the main event, and that was all that she wrote. So guys, don't forget to like and subscribe as I had just recapped UFC 309. Now, was this card everything that we had expected to be? Hey, you know what? It's not bad when you have Donald Trump come to the fights. It's always a little more extra when Donald Trump is there, right? It sort of gives it this different flair and flavor when Donald Trump shows up. I mean, look, he's a true fan of the sport, and no matter what, whether he was going to win or lose the presidency, he was going to show up for this fight regardless. But the fact that he won and the fact that he's going to be sworn in January, I think made this event even bigger. Now, what about Tom Aspinall? Are we going to see a fight between Jon Jones and Tom Aspinall? We don't know. Now, I'm going to make this next segment about the contract negotiations of Jon Jones. Where is he going to be in a couple of months? Is he going to fight? Is he not going to fight? Or is he going to renegotiate his contract and perhaps maybe get a bigger bag for a Tom Aspinall fight, or maybe take on Alex Pereira? Perhaps he'll decide to vacate the belt and have these fun fights that he's talking about. Pereira, Jamal Hill, all these different fights that he wants to experiment in. I sort of get what he's talking about, right? Now, everybody wants him to fight Tom Aspinall, but the name of the game is get your money, get your legacy, and get out. And I think Jon Jones has an opportunity to do that. Now, a lot of you just want to see him fight Tom Aspinall, and I get it. As a hardcore fan, I want to see that too. But I also want to see humanity in mixed martial arts. I also want to see fighters take the best decisions for themselves, their health, and their family. And if he was to retire right now, he can go out on top. And I don't think there's any way that you can top this performance tonight. Maybe you can, maybe you will, maybe you won't. But why take that risk? And ultimately, that is the lesson that we learned from tonight's event. Inshallah, don't forget to like and subscribe. I will see you guys in the next content to come. And I really enjoyed this fight night because it's another great fight night in the books. Great weekend overall. Look, were the main events ideal? No. It wasn't ideal for Jake Paul and Mike Tyson to fight. But they did, and it happened, and now it's in the books. But it had cultural impact. Jon Jones's fight tonight, maybe not so much of the cultural impact, at least not in the way where Elon Musk and Donald Trump showed up. But the fact that Elon Musk and Donald Trump showed up for a Jon Jones fight, I think is very impactful in the career of Jon Jones. But what is next for him? That we don't know. What we do know is that Jon Jones said he's not done yet. But what exactly does he mean by that? Right now, we're not going to know. And that's probably a video for another time and another content. But for now, like and subscribe. I will see you guys in the next one. Inshallah.